Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, so today we're going to continue the reading on Mahāmoggallāna, the other chief disciple of the Buddha. So the last time where we left off in the reading, we covered a section that talked about how the Buddha guided Moggallāna to overcome some of the hindrances, which is, for example, sloth and torpor was a hindrance. Restlessness was also another hindrance. And there was some, what's called, what was the word? Very step-by-step sequence of advice on how to overcome sloth and torpor. So if anyone who watched this recording is interested, they can go back to the previous recording that talked about Mahāmoggallāna's struggle to attain Nibbana. Okay, so he did attain arhatship very quickly in 1 week, but he had needed assistance from the Buddha along the way. Sariputta also attained arhathood. Okay, so this week we're going to read together the most excellent pair of disciples. So not just the present Buddha Gautama that we know had 2 chief disciples. A lot of the previous Buddhas also had 2 chief disciples. Okay, so for a fully enlightened one, his 2 chief disciples and his personal attendant are as necessary as the ministers of war, of the interior, and of finance are to a king. So if we look at kings or even present day country leaders, whether they are kings or presidents or prime minister, usually they have a set of ministers by their side. And there's always going to be a minister of, well, you can call it minister of war or the minister that controls the army, the military. And so not only during ancient times, but till today, there's always going to be someone who's the head of that. Why? Because for any country, military strength is considered very important for the survival of that country. Yeah. Of course, today, when we talk about military strength, it's no longer just a show of, most excellent weaponry or machinery or the size of your army in terms of number of people in your army. Now we talk about cybersecurity and, in the age of AI, so to speak. So the strength of the military now also has to be enhanced by knowledge in cyber attacks. And indeed, people who are wanting to attack another country, they can actually do damage to the country just by attacking their internet security system. So we live in a different era now, but still there has to be a minister or head of the military. And here it talks about minister of interior. So in some countries nowadays, it's like a home minister or someone who takes care of the going-ons within the country, like For example, if there are natural disasters or, then the Home Minister is involved. Other things are like, I mean, in the basic terms, in a smaller country, a Home Minister will probably cover a couple of other things like education, health. In bigger countries, you would have a health minister, an education minister, etc., etc. Yeah, and of course, there's always going to be a one of finance. So what this sentence is trying to say is that the role of the two chief disciples and the Buddha's personal attendant are very important, and should not be considered minor roles. So the Buddha himself used this comparison with a state's administration. He spoke of Ananda, who could remember all the discourses. Ananda had this amazing memory of all discourses. So he was like the treasure of the Dhamma, because of his memory, he was like keeper of the Dhamma. Sariputta as its marshal or general in command, and Moggallāna as the child's nurse, Minister of the Interior, Home Minister. And of these four, including the Buddha, two groups of two had certain things in common. So both Buddha and Ananda belonged to the warrior caste. So they were from a warrior caste. In fact, they were cousins. Sariputta and Moggallāna to the Brahmin caste. And this affinity showed itself also in their lives. Ananda was always with the Buddha. From the time when he was appointed his attendant, he followed him like a shadow. There were times where Ananda couldn't follow the Buddha to some places where the Buddha was invited to give a sermon. And Ananda asked the Buddha to promise him to repeat that sermon when the Buddha returned. And that's how Ananda was able to, he was like a keeper, treasure of all the discourses, with his amazing memory. And that's why we see in the suttas a lot, the first sentence says, "Thus have I heard." So it's an account from Ananda. Thus had Ananda heard about this discourse, etc., etc. So similarly, Moggallāna was always inseparable from Sariputta and nearly always dwelt together with him. Whenever the Buddha in advancing years felt physically tired, these three disciples were the only ones whom he asked to expound the Dhamma on his behalf. And this happened, for instance, at Kapilavatthu, where Moggallāna gave a long discourse on sense control as a remedy against being submerged in the flood of the six senses. After Sariputta and Maha Moggallāna had attained arhatship, the Buddha announced to the order that they would now be his chief disciples. Now, here it's important to understand that the Buddha already had some disciples before Sariputta and Maha Moggallāna came along. So usually in terms of the order of the monks, seniority is measured by when they get ordained, when they join the Sangha order. Yeah, that's how till today seniority is measured. So usually if, let's say in terms of seating arrangements or whatever, they go by seniority, not by age, but by how many vasas a monk had observed. So basically when they had been ordained monk, into monkhood. So you can imagine that some of the other disciples who were already disciples of the Buddha would have questioned that decision, because the role of the chief disciple is a very senior one, right? So some of the monks were very surprised and began to grumble, asking why the master did not treat with such distinction those ordained first, the men of the first hour. So there were 5 disciples after the Buddha gained enlightenment in Bodh Gaya, he traveled to Varanasi, or present-day Benares, India Park, where he met back with the 5 ascetics who kind of, in a sense, ditched him when the Buddha decided to go middle path. So those were considered the first disciples of the Buddha. So the men on the first are the first 5 disciples, or Yasa, or the 3 Kaspas. So these were all very senior, early disciples. So why did he overlook them and give prominence to those who had entered the order last and were of junior standing? And to this, the awakened one replied that each reaps according to his merit. And for aeons, Sariputta and Moggallāna had been progressing towards this state by gradually cultivating the necessary faculties. For aeons, so very, very, very long time. Others, however, had developed along different lines. And although both chief disciples were of another caste and from another region than the Buddhas, their special position within the noble order was an outcome of the law of karma. So this is quite interesting. Yeah, so in a way special, because it also was based on their own practice, their own direction, their own aspiration from the past, their own accumulation of merit. So in many ways, the Buddha had spoken in praise of this noble pair of disciples. If a devout lay woman should admonish her only son, whom she dearly loves, she would rightly do so by saying, "My dear son, you should be like Chitta the householder or Hataka of Alavi, because these 2 are models and exemplars for my lay devotees." And she should further say, "But if, my dear, you go forth from home into the homeless life of a monk, you should be like Sariputta and Moggallāna, because they are models and exemplars for my bhikkhu disciples." All monks. This on the Buddha's addressing all monks. Seek and cultivate the company of Sariputta and Moggallāna. They are wise and very helpful to their fellows in the holy life. Sariputta is like a mother. Moggallāna is like a nurse. Sariputta trains the monks for the fruit of stream entry, Moggallāna for the supreme goal. So this term, Sariputta is like a mother, Moggallāna is like a nurse, is also found in one of the suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya as well. So the Buddha himself used this simile to explain the role of how the role, not just as chief disciples, but the role Sariputta and Moggallāna played in terms of training of the monks as well. So junior monks or new monks that come into the order, Sariputta trains them, he teaches them, and guides them into the fruit, not just entering stream entry, but attaining the fruit of stream entry, and then Moggallāna brings them to Nibbana. So that was the role they played. So the characterization of the 2 in the last text may be interpreted as follows. Sariputta, like a mother, gives birth to the path of emancipation in his pupils, urging them to cut through the first, most basic fetters and thus attain to stream entry. In this way, he converts his pupils by vigorously diverting them from the futility of the round of existence, that is, the round of samsaric birth and death and birth and death, and he guides them into the zone of safety, that is, entering into the stream. At this point, Moggallāna takes over and leads the pupils further along the upward path, supporting them in their struggle for arhatship, in the same way that he himself had been helped by the master. Thus, he is like a wet nurse, nourishing the pupils' strengths, sustaining their growth. Both these aspects are found perfectly united in a fully awakened one. So a Buddha can do both. He has the skill. But in Sariputta and Moggallāna, they were separate qualifications. Though both were liberated in both ways, for Sariputta, the major emphasis was on wisdom, and for Moggallāna, on the meditative liberation of the mind. And for this reason, Sariputta guided disciples to the intuitive understanding of liberating truth, the breakthrough of the Dhamma, the vision of things in their real undistorted nature. With Moggallāna, who knew well the subtle and tortuous labyrinths of the mind, the stress was on harnessing the forces of concentration or collectedness toward the removal of all remaining defilements and fetters. This fact found perfect expression when these two spiritual sons of the Buddha had to look after Rahula, the Buddha's only son. Like every newly ordained monk, Rahula had two teachers, one in knowledge, one in conduct. Sariputta was appointed his Rahula's teacher in knowledge. Moggallāna was Rahula's teacher in conduct and spiritual practice. Once Sariputta said to his friend that compared with Moggallāna in regards to supernormal powers, he was like a small splinter of rock set against the mighty Himalayas. So Moggallāna was known to be foremost in psychic ability, second only to the Buddha. Yeah. Moggallāna, however, replied that compared with Sariputta in regard to the power of wisdom, he was like a tiny grain of salt set against a big salt barrel. So about the differing range of wisdom, the Buddha said that there are questions that only he could conceive and answer, but not Sariputta. And there are other questions that only Sariputta could clarify, but not Moggallāna. And there are those questions that only Moggallāna could solve, but not the other disciples. So that kind of stage of wisdom. So thus the two chief disciples were like a bridge between the supreme qualities of the Buddha and the capacities of the other disciples. Anyway, these are commentaries, yeah? So when Devadatta, Devadatta was also Buddha, one of Buddha's cousins, but Devadatta somehow always had this inclination to harm the Buddha. I'm not sure it was due to jealousy or anyway, there was a very interesting relationship between them. And Devadatta was known to be a vegetarian too, by the way. So when Devadatta voiced his claim to lead the order, Devadatta claimed that he was a better leader than the Buddha. The Buddha said that he would not entrust anybody with the leadership of the Sangha, not even his two chief disciples, let alone Devadatta. And between the extremes of discipleship, with Sariputta and Moggallāna at one end of the scale and Devadatta, the most depraved of the disciples, on the other, there is a long and varied line of disciples with different degrees of accomplishments and virtues. It is characteristic that the only slander uttered against the chief disciples came from a follower of Devadatta. So there also in the Sangha order eventually, there were monks who in the end became followers of Devadatta. And the monk Kokkalika, wishing to malign them, told the Buddha that the two meaning Sariputta and Maha Moggallana, had evil intentions, which in fact was the case with Devadatta. The Buddha, however, replied, "Don't say so, Kokkalika, don't speak like that. Let your heart have glad confidence in Sariputta and Moggallāna. They are virtuous monks." But Kokkalika, in spite of this empathetic admonition, persisted in his slander. So slander is breaking the fourth precept. Slander is where you have speech that tries to split a group of people. In this case, the slander was to try and split the Sangha. Very serious. In Buddhist texts, one of the serious crimes to commit slander of the Sangha. And according to the old texts, Devadatta and Pokalika were reborn in a state of utter suffering. In Devadatta's case, because he tried to injure the Buddha. He injured the Buddha. And so that is also one of the very serious crimes. While Sariputta and Moggallāna won the highest place, Nibbana. In the Pali Canon, there are many reports about the common activities of the two chief disciples as they assisted the master in looking after the community of monks. Both worked tirelessly for the advancement and benefit of the order, and their activities aimed at maintaining its inner concord, stability, and discipline deserve special mention. At the request of the Buddha, they brought about the banishment of a clique of monks known as the Group of Six. After their 6 leaders, whose reckless and scandalous behavior were threatening to tarnish the entire image of the Buddha's dispensation in the eyes of wider populace of Ganges Valley. So this is quite serious. And the Vinaya Pitaka is the heart of the Vinaya is part of the bigger 3 baskets. One of them is the Vinaya, and that's the rule of the order of the monks and nuns. So the Vinaya Pitaka records many instances when the Buddha had to promulgate rules of discipline on account of their misconduct of the group of 6. So in the early days, when the Buddha first set up the order of Sangha, there weren't that many rules for monks and even eventually nuns. But because there were, like, for example, this group of 6, and then after that, some other monks who tend to create a little bit of disorder. And so slowly, the Vinaya came to be. One major upheaval they brought about is reported in the Kittagiri Sutta, in the Majjhima Nikaya, when they flaunted the Buddha's regulations regarding the proper times for meals. Finally, they behaved in such a frenzied way that the Buddha sent Sariputta and Moggallāna at the head of a group of virtuous monks to banish these 6 from their seat of residence, which was near Kittagiri. Thereafter, most of them left the order. The most noteworthy mission the 2 great disciples performed together was to induce the newly ordained monks led astray by Devadatta to return to the Buddha's fold and to the right conduct of the monk's life. At that time, when Sariputta gave his exhortation to those misguided monks, he spoke about the power of sword reading, while Moggallāna spoke excuse me, on psychic powers. On another occasion, when a junior monk came to the Buddha and complained that the Venerable Sariputta had treated him rudely, Moggallāna and Ananda called together all the monks so that for their instruction and edification, they could hear Sariputta's dignified reply to those accusations. The two chief disciples often lived together in the same cell of the monastery, and they held many dialogues for the benefit of their fellow monks. They were very, very close, yeah? And an example of this is the Anangana Sutta, also in the Majjhima Nikaya, Sariputta's great sermon on the removal of evil wishes, which was inspired by questions from Moggallāna. At the end of the sermon, Moggallāna applauded Sariputta's eloquence, comparing his discourse to a garland of flowers which one might place on one's head as an ornament. On another occasion, when a group of leading disciples had gathered in the Gosingasala tree forest on a full moon night, Sariputta asked them each in turn to describe what they considered to be the ideal monk, one who could illuminate this forest bright. And Moggallāna replied, "Here, friend Sariputta, two monks engage in a talk on the higher Dhamma, and they question each other, and each being questioned by the other answers without foundering, and their talk rolls on in accordance with the Dhamma. That kind of monk could illuminate this Gosingasala tree forest." And later the Buddha confirmed that Moggallāna was indeed a very capable speaker of the Dhamma, as is evident from his discourses in the canon. The canon means the Dhamma teachings. Yeah? Talks on the Dhamma gain in range and depth when they issue from an experience that transcends the realm of the senses. The more one has widened one's consciousness by deep meditation and personal insight into truth, the more convincing one's words will be. And when one can speak from heights of wisdom, one's understanding will be contagious. The Buddha often extolled his chief disciples for their personal qualities as much as for their contributions to his mission. One particularly striking instance is recorded in the Udana. Udana is a small section of the Sutta Pitaka. I think it's in the Khuddaka Nikaya. I could be wrong. The Khuddaka Nikaya is a compilation of a lot of the smaller discourses. For example, the Thera-gata that fall under this category. So Dana, I think, falls under this category as well. It's short verses. So when the two were seated near the master, immersed in deep concentration based on contemplation of the body, first the Buddha spoke an inspired utterance, Udana, in praise of Sariputta. Just as a mountain made of solid rock stands firm and unshakable, even so, when delusion is destroyed, a bhikkhu, like a mountain, is not perturbed. Then he applauded Moggallāna. With mindfulness of the body established, controlled over context's sixfold base, a bhikkhu who is always collected can know Nibbana for himself. And it happened only once that the Buddha preferred Moggallāna's attitude in a certain manner to that of Sariputta. After he had dismissed from his presence a band of noisy, unmannerly monks, just recently ordained, the master later asked his two chief disciples what they had thought when he sent those monks away. Sariputta said he thought that the master wanted to enjoy a blissful abiding in meditation, and that they, the chief disciples, were to do the same. But the Buddha reproached him, saying that he should never again entertain such thoughts. Then he turned to Moggallāna with the same question. Moggallāna replied that he too had thought the master wanted to enjoy the bliss of meditation. But if so, then the responsibility for looking after the community of monks would have devolved on Sariputta and himself, Moggallāna. So the Buddha praised him and said that if both his chief disciples took care of the community, it would be as good as if he himself looked after the monks. So this chapter, I guess, is again an emphasis of how important the role of the two chief disciples of the Buddha, the role that they played, not just in terms of the training and establishment and maintenance of the order of the Sangha, but also just making sure there is a certain order and harmony within the community of monks and the Sangha order, which was very important in terms of the preservation of the Dhamma. So they played a very, very important role, not only in the teaching and the training of the monks, but also in ensuring there is order, there is harmony, so they were very, very important. They played a very, very important role. Yeah. Okay, so we today is a little bit shorter, but I try to keep it short, not too much in one go, just bite size. And in the next reading, we can read together about Moggallāna's psychic powers. So he was known to have developed certain psychic ability. Yeah. So we'll pause here until the next reading. And take any questions or comments. Would anyone wish to share anything, any thoughts? No, not today. Doesn't have to be on this topic. It can be in general as well.
May, thank you very much for the talk. Interesting. Are we continuing this next Sunday or?
I have to check with the other team guides, like the group, the chat group. Usually, if someone's available, they put their name up.
Yes.
And so far, no one has. But are there any requests? Does anyone have anyone that they want to invite to come on? Or any topic?
This is very, very good, very interesting. We can continue, yes.
Yeah, I hope so too. So the idea is indeed to continue these readings as and when we don't have a twin guide to come and talk. So the disciples in this book are Sariputta, Maha Moggallāna. Maha Kassapa was also very interesting. He was known to have a very interesting way of practice, almost severe asceticism, but not quite. It was just his inclination, I think. If I remember correctly. So that's Maha Kassapa. So also when the Buddha passed away into Parinibbana, both Sariputta and Moggallāna had already passed. So Mahākassapa, apart from Ananda, was considered one of the more senior ones that was still around to kind of and Mahākassapa was actually not in the same location. He had also a following of monks, and they were traveling and teaching. So he wasn't with the Buddha when the Buddha went into Parinibbana, came for of course, the funeral, etc. But his story is also interesting. And then, of course, we cannot leave out Ananda, chief attendant. Anuruddha was very important. We see him often in the suttas, and Mahākachana. And this book also covered some of the great women disciples of the Buddha, and some of these we had already very briefly touched upon in the some of them in the Therigatha and some of them in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. So previously we had touched upon Visakha, Khema, Kisagotami, I think, Sona with many children, Nanda, I think we did. But there are a couple more, so they're interesting. And of course, a very interesting character, Angulimala. He was interesting. His story was interesting. And Anathapindika, of course, who was the foremost lay supporter, lay disciple and lay supporter. And then a couple of other people. So yeah, so this is an interesting book. A lot of what we read also are, bear in mind, commentaries of the authors, but still it's good to know. So yeah, but the idea is hopefully we can continue this for a bit, and then we see how we go after that. But if anyone has any topics or anything they want to see being discussed or talked about, feel free, and then we can always put forth. Okay. Anyone else has anything they want to add? Another interesting reading, it's not very often done in Dharma talks, more in Sunday schools, are the Jataka tales. So the Jataka tales are more like short stories of the previous lives, mainly of the Buddha, but sometimes the characters that are involved during that previous life of the Buddha quite often turn out to be Ananda or Sariputta or Mahāmoggallāna or Devadatta. So yeah, but yeah, like I said, Jataka tales are not often, they are used as a reference sometimes, but they're not often used as a topic in Dharma talks. They're more used to teach kids in Sunday school because it's more of a story, you know, like Aesop's fables. But if people would like to see that being covered after we finish the book, then yeah, that could be an option as well. More of a fun reading. But anyway, yeah, anything that people think about, feel free to let us know. Okay, so if there are no further comments, we can end here for today. And we will, once next Sunday's schedule is decided, and we'll send out the notice on WhatsApp group as usual. All right. Let us share some merit. I hope you can still see my screen. I have no idea. Let me try.
We can see the screen clearly.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so let us share merits together. I'll try to fit them in one page. I can. Oops. Oops. Okay. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, thank you. Those of you who dialed in today, thank you so much for coming online. I hope you enjoyed today's session. And those who are going to watch this recording, I hope you enjoyed the reading. And the next time we will continue to read on, not sure yet whether it's next Sunday or after that, but we will then continue on the reading on Mahāmoggallāna's psychic abilities. Okay, have a good week, and hope you have a lot of smiles, and also a happy and healthy week ahead. Take care. Bye-bye.